Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Power with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texans about what's going on in our state. Today, I have my colleague James Quintero to talk about all things administrative bloat and why your property taxes keep going up. And we have dozens upon dozens of superintendents and administrators making well over $400,000 a year. James, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me back, Mandy.
I am looking at your data and all of your research and blown away that Texans spent almost $20 billion. It was $19.5 billion last year on non-teacher compensation. And that's about 2/3 of the amount spent on teacher compensation. What is happening in our public schools to cause all of this administrative bloat?
Well, what a great question. And what this data does for me is it punctures the narrative that we're not fully funding public education. That is a lie that we consistently come across in the policy world. And I think if anything, we are misprioritizing public education funding. We are not falling down on our job of making sure that our kids in the classroom have enough money. And so it's one of those symptoms in the world of local public finance that you see where there's a real lack of constraint and priorities that is resulting in all sorts of bad things for taxpayers and students alike.
You use the term we. I'm going to use the term the education cartel that has totally taken over the public education system, starting from the top and down, where they really do control what is happening. Right here, I'm looking at the TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, HR Services. Of course, TASB has over 20 different entities, organizations under their umbrella, and of our 1,200 school districts, almost all of them use TASB for their services, including, I would say, their superintendent executive search, where they're placing superintendents into these school districts, or I should say, moving them around and shuffling them after they've either gotten into trouble, failed to perform and raise academic standards, or pass bonds. This is what's happening. Of course, there's others. There's the Moat Casey executive search firm. There's Welsh and Gallegos. I believe they have one. I mean, you've got these search firms, but ultimately, it's this education cartel that controls things. In particular, let's talk about TASB HR Services Superintendent Compensation in Public Schools outline. What's going on here and what did you find?
Yeah, one of the things I did in preparation for this interview is I wanted to go right to the source. Those who have perhaps the closest connection to the superintendent cartel and really survey their data. And so all of the data that we're going to talk about today is actually sourced from the Texas Association of School Boards' own survey information, which I actually find to be a terrific resource in terms of illuminating how much is going to superintendents, both on the salary side as well as the benefit side. And so just starting off with the salary information, one of the things that I noticed about TASB's salary data, which is surveyed from about 1,000 districts and 3/4 of those responded. What the survey data shows is that the median superintendent salary ranged from about $120,000 in districts where there were fewer than 500 students, so very small districts, to as much as $367,000 in districts where there were more than 50,000 students. So quite a wide range there. What we also did in addition to this data is we looked at the Texas Education Agency Superintendent Salary Tool, and we said, using this database, we asked, how many of these superintendents earn more than the Texas governor? Right? It turns out that 561 superintendents in Texas earn more than Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who earned about $154,000 last year. So
591 superintendents.
561
superintendents earn more than the governor of Texas.
That's right.
That is absolutely absurd.
Who of course has responsibility for 30+ million Texans.
Right.
So quite significant there. What I found really fascinating, though, is when you query the database to find out how many of these superintendents actually earn more than the President of the United States. And our findings show that 16 superintendents earn more than $400,000 per year, and that's just on the salary side.
Just on the salary side. Well, that is absolutely insane. Let's just say that. That is and this is the problem here when you have, again, the cartel, which I would say TASB is the kingpin. They're right there in the center of that iron triangle, directing, steering, facilitating contracts and executive search and the movement of the money. And to be clear, about 60 cents on the dollar that we taxpayers are paying goes out of the classroom. And it's going to absolute nonsense like paying over 500 superintendents across the state of Texas more than the governor of Texas. Absolutely ridiculous and absurd. When we're looking at that, you made a comment. You said that's just in salary.
That's right.
Let's dig into what's happening. And that's why I noted these disgusting executive search firms that are moving these superintendents around. Many of them are failures in districts. I'll talk about the one that was the lady that was brought over from California through an executive search firm, placed into Midland ISD. She was an absolute disaster there. They got rid of her in about 2 years, sent her to, I believe, Fort Worth ISD, where now taxpayers are still paying for her close to $1 million when the board had to get rid of her too. It is absurd. And it's because the way these contracts are written, it's like they're being written for NBA stars or baseball players or college football coaches, where they're acting like they have to lure these people into these positions to make $500,000 a year. But the truth is, they're adding more icing on the cake by doing what? What are the supplements that are being added onto these ridiculous superintendent contracts?
Yeah, this is probably the point in time where I should unveil the scroll, because there is just a laundry list of different benefit items that school districts provide to their superintendents. And again, this is where the TASB information comes in. It comes into play because they really do a good job. Even though I don't like complimenting TASB, they do a good job in this instance of showcasing just what these superintendents are receiving. And so I apologize in advance for this long list, but these are the things that very likely your superintendent is either receiving some of or maybe even all of. So starting at the top, about 5% of the districts surveyed gave a cash bonus directly to their superintendent. Most of those bonuses were about $15,000 or less. 17% of districts provide a car allowance, and the median annual vehicle allowance was about $6,000. 89% of districts provide superintendents with health insurance benefits, and the median contribution from the district on the health insurance front was about $4,500. 62% of districts pay dues for a superintendent to join a civic or professional club, and the median annual expense to the district for that particular item was about $1,000 per year. 31% of districts provide their superintendent with a cell phone or internet allowance, and the median annual allowance was about $1,200. 39% of districts provide pay directly into a superintendent's retirement account, and the median contribution there is about $17,710. 17% of districts contribute to a superintendent's tax-deferred investment account, and the median contribution there is $10,000. Just a few more. 12% of districts provide a housing subsidy, and I found this part really interesting. Of those that gave a housing subsidy, 64 provide residence only, 9 provided a housing allowance only, and 8 districts actually provided a residence plus housing allowance. I'm not real sure what's happening there, but that's pretty expensive. The median housing allowance was $6,000. 7% of districts provide the superintendent with an allowance for business expenses. The median annual allowance for that allotment is about $5,000. 2% of districts provide a superintendent with life insurance coverage, and the median annual cost there to taxpayers is about $500 per year. There's 1% of districts provide long-term disability and TRS service credit purchase. So if you go through and you add the value of all of these things together, you're talking well in excess of $50,000 in additional benefits provided on top of the salaries. Now, very often the education cartel will criticize us for calling attention to superintendent compensation, asking, well, don't you want us to have the best administrators in place? And my response to that is, every dollar that goes to these fat cat administrators is one less dollar available for the classroom. And so if we fight passionately on this issue, it's from the standpoint that our classrooms are really being robbed of the resources they need to teach Johnny to read, write, and do math.
That's right. And many of these superintendents, to be clear, that are making upwards of $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year have failing school districts. They have, upwards of 20, 30, 40, 50+% of kids that cannot read on grade level. So that's exactly correct. There's a couple things that you touched on that I want to go back to. You said 62% of districts pay dues for superintendents to join civic or professional club. That really takes me back to the Texas Association of School Administrators, where they are just another offshoot of the cartel kingpin TASB. And this is where, of course, Brian Woods went over there after he left Northside ISD. He got caught electioneering. It caught the governor's attention. TEA was instructed to investigate. And then lo and behold, a couple months later, he retired and went over there to TASB, where he still is today, making, and this is something I wanted to also jump into, when you talked about the defined benefit pension plan and talking about the median contribution, I want Texans to understand it's not just the contribution. These superintendents, they are eligible for their pension plan that runs for the rest of their lives, right? There is no end date until you keel over dead. And that's fine. That's part of the thing. But the problem is that it is upward for these high paid superintendents based on the way that the formula works, $300,000 a year. $330,000 a year for these superintendents at this top level is what many of them receive when they retire. And then, of course, we see so many of them going into that the bond cartel scheme, the architects, engineering, and construction firms. They're going over there and they're working for these entities, or they're going to work for TASA or whatever, and where they're receiving more taxpayer dollars. So this is something that taxpayers, we want to ensure that our teachers are compensated and that they are rewarded and that they stay in the classrooms and all of these wonderful things. But this is a scam that is being perpetuated on to Texans with these superintendent salaries, all of these insane benefit packages. And we're just seeing it with all of this when you say, we're going to pay for this, we're going to pay for this. And the other thing that really stood out to me are these housing subsidies. This is wild. I mean, if you're being paid $500,000 a year or $300,000 a year or whatever it is that these people are being paid, you would think that you could afford to buy your own house or rent your own house or whatever it is that you thought you needed to do. Let's jump into some of these housing subsidy boondoggles that are raising property taxes out the wazoo and why that Texans need to clamp down on this grift by the executive search firms and the superintendents that are effectively figured out a way to funnel taxpayer dollars into their bank accounts and into houses. Let's go. What happened in Grand Prairie, James?
Well, what a great question. And let me start with a comment that I think bridges both critiques here. It's not that we at the foundation don't believe people ought to make a good living.
Right.
We do. But there is a firm belief that people in public service ought not get rich from being in government. And when you look at the value of some of these things being provided, it's very obvious that we have an elite few living like kings at public expense. And I think there's a lot to take issue with there. And so, going back to the Grand Prairie example, I actually stumbled across all of this superintendent excess about 10 years ago. If we go back in time 10 years, what we find is that there was a local Fox affiliate who I believe broke the story about Grand Prairie Superintendent Susan Hull, who is now departed, so I don't want to speak too ill of the dead. But she at that time was, it was revealed that she was being provided a $700,000 house that the district had used bond money to purchase and had given her.
The district used bond money.
Yes.
To purchase a 700, which would be well over $1 million now, because of course that was before the housing boom. But I want to be clear. We are looking at $236 billion with a B and growing of ISD bond debt. This is why taxpayers feel crippled in their daily life, because of this insane debt being levied on them by local ISDs and absolutely crushing the everyday Texas family. They used bond debt to buy a house for a superintendent.
And by the way, if you go back and you read that 10-year-old article, what you'll find is the reporter encountering people and saying, hey, did you know this thing was going on? And people are absolutely flabbergasted.
Sure they are.
Right? And so nobody knew that when they went to approve a bond at an election, that it included a superintendent house. Right. So let's just go through and quickly describe this house, because it's quite a magnificent creature. So, again, a $700,000 house at 2,800 square feet. The property sits on 5 acres and comes complete with a 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a horse barn.
A horse barn?
And what this district had done is they said, well, Dr. Hull, we're going to rent you this property for $2,000 a month on paper, but so as to soften the blow, we're going to provide you with a $1,000 housing subsidy. So really the real cost is $1,000 per month. So
meanwhile, that bond, to be clear, with $700,000 in it probably on the life of the loan, right? We all have to go and look when we buy a house. Yeah. You can see the life of the loan. You have to see it. Typically, doubling it is what you can roughly expect to pay. So taxpayers spent over $1.5 million, right around $1.5 million to pay for a suit. Disgusting.
But it gets worse.
Oh,
that's not even the worst part. So where this property really stumbled into the limelight is the fact that the Grand Prairie ISD School Board got curious about a set of expenditures that were being approved and utilized to renovate the property. And some of them came to ask questions about why they were spending so much money on this singular property. And come to find out, the superintendent had used about $160,000 to upgrade the home
of school district
taxpayer money.
No.
And so there's $160,000 worth of total expenses. Some of those upgrades included $45,000 for a new fence, new toilets, new sinks, new tile, $24,000 to repave the driveway, and a lot of other very questionable things. And so the board actually got grumpy about this whole situation, as they should have, and they launched an investigation into how it is that the superintendent was able to maneuver so much money into renovating this home. Now, in the course of their investigation, what they did is they contracted with a law firm to see if there was any wrongdoing that occurred. After about 10 months and $363,000, the law firm determined that the superintendent had done nothing wrong and that there's nothing to see here.
Yeah, I'm sure that I would love to know what the law firm is. I'm going to go with that it was part of the cartel who came, the nothing to see here. So she didn't even like the house, but you bought it for $700,000. You dumped in another $160,000 without board approval. And this is a problem that we see across Texas. And this is why the Gang of Eight, I call it the Game of Eight, it's the Team of Eight language, is absolute garbage. It came in to tell trustees, you need to defer to the superintendents. The Texas Association of School Boards does training to tell you need to work with the superintendents so they can do this. The reality is that Texans are being robbed blind. That is criminal right there and should have been prosecuted, in my opinion. That is absolutely absurd that now we are well over, with including the legal fees, well over $1 million for a superintendent to have a house with a swimming pool and a stable for horses. It's disgusting. Meanwhile, property taxpayers are sitting here looking at their bills going, can I afford to pay for the light bill? Can I afford to put healthy food in my children's belly? And you've got these sharks, these snakes slithering around figuring out ways to steal from taxpayers. It's disgusting.
That's exactly right. And so once this item exploded onto the scene, it really captured my attention, and I began to explore the world of superintendent overcompensation. And I can't tell you the number of instances like this that I've stumbled across over the years. It's very frustrating. One of the more egregious was actually uncovered by a Texas Scorecard back in 2023 when they highlighted the fact that Highland Park ISD bought its superintendent a $1.8 million house. By the way, I went to the appraisal district to see if the value of that property had increased in just the few short years since that news broke. And the appraisal district now values that property at $2.1 million.
Nice.
Now, come to find out, the district bought that home and then gave it to its superintendent to live in rent-free. So this person doesn't even pay rent on the property that they're living in. And if you look at it, you've got a 2-story home. It's 2,700 square feet. You've got 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a pool, and a very nice outside space that I gawked at for just a moment. And one of the things that's most frustrating about this example is if you look at the value of the home being provided, and then you look at his compensation, we're talking about a person who's getting paid more than $437,000 this year, which again is more than the President of the United States makes.
And lives rent-free at the taxpayer's expense.
Absolutely.
Disgusting. Disgusting. What else? Give me another one.
So one of the ones that came across my wire recently was a young lady who got hired by Lago Vista ISD. Now, admittedly, this person does not receive an overwhelming salary. They're at about $200,000 per year, which is still a lot. I mean, again,
more than most Texans.
This is public service. You're right, because the median household income, according to the census data, was about $80,000 for Texans. So
more than twice as much.
Right?
Yep. Keep going.
What really frustrated me about this instance is Lago Vista ISD hired the superintendent away from another district and gave her $10,000 in moving expense, which, okay, I think is a lot, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But what really chided me is the fact that if you look at the reporting around this issue, the superintendent was given $50,000 to purchase a new home in her new district. $50,000. And it's that sort of nonchalant, uncaring attitude towards taxpayers that I think is not only exploding our tax bills, but it's frustrating everyone.
It should frustrate everyone. I'm sitting here thinking, the meme that we've all seen with Tom Cruise going, "Show me the money," when he's talking to his agent, right? And this is what is happening here. It is the same thing. These executive search firms, TASB executive search firm, Mukasey executive search firm, Gallego search firm, there's tons of them. The search firm that brought in this superintendent, they work here. The name's escaping me. They work here in Texas. They're the ones that brought the literally illegal alien into the Iowa school district. I mean, these search firms, their entire objective is to try and get as much money as humanly possible out of the taxpayers. You do not have to pay these superintendents this much money to do these jobs. It is utterly ridiculous that, again, in 2024, we spent on total expenditures was $105 billion in Texas public schools. That is over $19,400 per student spent. we're looking at almost 20% of that is going to non-teacher compensation. It is absolutely disgusting that we have, again, every Texan that I know, and including in my house, we've had to tighten our belts. We've had to cut some things out. We've had to look at the spreadsheet and go, what can we afford for our kids? This is what Texans are doing. And meanwhile, you've got these cartel evil snakes that are driving up the cost of administrative bloat and then turning around and showing up at the Capitol, which many of these superintendents on this list, which we'll post it, many of these superintendents show up at the Capitol to lobby with the lobbying firms as taxpayer-funded lobbyists to scream and cry, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. We can't do this. And the reality is it's because they are funneling money out of our classrooms away from our teachers. We heard this before when we had Rob McClellan from Dripping Springs ISD sit there and say at a TASB conference that they were instructed by the CEO, I believe, of Moat Casey at the time, not to give teacher pay raises because it needed to be, to quote him, weaponized. This is what is happening across the board and why I say it is a cartel, because we can look at the numbers. In Texas, we can go back to 1992. That's where we can go back on the data. Between 1992 and 2025 in Texas, our student population has increased by 54%. Teacher staff has increased by 73%. And non-teacher staff has increased by 238%. And 52% of all public school employees are not teachers. This is absurd that we are raking Texans over the coals and effectively taking their tax dollars at the barrel of a gun, because a cop's going to show up and evict you from your own house if you don't pay your property taxes.
That is well said.
Should be criminal that we are allowing this to go on in Texas schools.
Well, you're absolutely right to call attention to all of the excess in the system. And I think actually the superintendent data that we're talking about now is directly linked to that, $19 billion figure that you cite, and that clearly shows there's a lot of excess in the system. Because one of my chief criticisms about data like this is that if we see superintendents overspending on themselves and not caring much about the taxpayer plight, then it's very likely that those closest to the superintendent are also receiving excessive salaries and benefits, right? The old saying, a fish rots from the head down. Mm-hmm. I think that very much applies here. And so, that signals to me a need for legislative action and to put in place some common sense guardrails so that our superintendents are still, compensated fairly, hopefully on the basis of their performance. But no one is asking that they live in a box around the corner in an alley, but we don't want them to live like kings at taxpayer expense, especially when so many of us are struggling to put food on the table today. So, and I just want to emphasize one of those points about superintendents not necessarily meeting the moment, right? And what I mean is, I was recently asked to give an interview about San Antonio school districts, and they wanted to know, who is the highest paid superintendent in the San Antonio area, and what does our student outcomes look like? And so what I did is I used, again, TEA's salary tool, and I paired that with txschools.gov, which gives you the latest A through F accountability score for all your various districts. And I said, okay, well, who's the highest paid superintendent in San Antonio? Turns out it's Harlandale ISD superintendent. He gets about $350,000 per year. And then I queried the txschools.gov database, and I said, well, how did they do last year? Did they perform at least at a high level that somewhat justifies this excessive compensation? And it turns out that they received a D rating in the latest A through F accountability system. And it turns out that only 33% of students can read, write, and do math at or above grade level in that district. What a mismatch.
67% of kids are failing, to be clear. They are failing. We are not sending them through the school system, preparing them to launch into the world, to reach their full potential, and to be great citizens of Texas. 67%, and we're paying them this much money. That is absolutely asinine. It is insane. And I will guarantee you that all of these superintendents, if they don't come, they're a part of these organizations, whether it's H.G. Chambers and his taxpayer-funded lobbying group. He shows up there all the time saying, we don't have more money. Brian Woods, who I talked about, who came from the San Antonio area, who got caught electioneering, now is at TASA, showing up there. Both of those gentlemen, just to be clear, they are now paid by tax dollars to lobby the legislature, which is why we need to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, by the way, because they are taxpayer-funded lobbyists working in cahoots with TASB, Mo Casey, all of these other cartel members to go up there and more than anything, to spread misinformation. I constantly hear them talking about, the basic allotment, which is, just over $6,000, when the reality is we are spending over $19,000 per student. But these people, Brian Woods, his highest salary was $350,000. The prior year was $343,000. The prior year was $345,000, which is multiplied to get his final amount that he would be paid. So I don't know exactly how much it is, but I'm going with he's making between $300,000 and $330,000 a year. Something like that would be my estimate based off those numbers. H.G. Chambers, lobbyist up there, he made $395,000, $395,000, $381,000. So again, you can assume that they are getting the max amount, and then they show up at the legislature to lobby and to stir up emotions of parents, of Texans that have no understanding of the reason you can't afford your home, the reason you feel like you are being pushed out and you have to make a choice between your kid being able to play an activity or putting healthy food on the table, is because of these cartel, evil, nefarious people that have figured out a way to rig the system from within and pay themselves astronomical sums of money for the rest of their lives. And this is a problem. I sincerely hope that the legislature will take up the issues with this outsized, insane administrative bloat that we are seeing. Before we wrap up.
Yes, let me say one more thing to make all of this just a little bit messier, because one of my great frustrations is the fact that you have some schemers in the superintendent role who have figured out not only how to game taxpayers directly, but also open up side operations, either directly or through their family. And just two quick examples that I want to cite is you've got a superintendent down in Barbers Hill ISD who has a consulting firm.
His name is Greg Poole.
Who has a consulting firm that has done tremendous business off of facilitating economic development agreements. I think that is a huge conflict of interest. And
created Jigsaw Solutions, has made over $1 million consulting and whatever. And he's the same superintendent being investigated because, of course, we saw as somehow in those same economic development solutions that between him and his lobbyist, former Democrat Representative Craig Island, and a whole host of really, really unsavory characters down there in Barbers Hill ISD, they have redirected $97 million of taxpayer money out of the ISD public accounts where you have public scrutiny. They have put it into an education foundation that they sit on, and then they have partnered with someone on the education foundation, Nathan Watkins. He sits on the education foundation with Greg Poole, and they have funneled millions upon millions of dollars into real estate development, like apartment complexes and stuff. I am so glad that the TEA is investigating, but you're exactly correct. They set up these side hustles, and this is how they become the kingmakers of a fiefdom that they have set up. I have talked to so many people there. They are terrified to try and come out and talk about what they know about these characters that are all wrapped up in this, and they're all using public dollars to do it.
That's right. And by the way, it's not just that one district. You have something closer to home with Hayes CISD's outgoing superintendent. He actually has his wife as a contractor to the district, taking in tens of thousands of dollars per year. We're actually trying to get a firm handle on that through the Public Information Act. But you have lots of different means and mechanisms by which superintendents are gaming the system and putting us as taxpayers at a real disadvantage. We need the legislature to come in with something comprehensive and to really safeguard taxpayers moving forward, because the system right now as a whole is an entire mess.
It's a huge mess. Taxpayers on the hook for several just nefarious, evil cartel leaders. James, look in the camera. Talk to the people of Texas, talk to the patriots, and talk to the legislature about what we need to do to shut down the education cartel that is stealing money from teachers and students and rig the system to put it into their bank accounts.
Yeah, we've spent the last 30 minutes or so talking about the challenges facing Texans, but let me reassure the audience that I think the Texas legislature is well primed to have an absolutely ambitious and strong legislative session where we put in place lots of taxpayer protections that deal not only with the shenanigans in school districts, but also in our cities and our counties too. So I know the moment looks difficult, but I think there is hope on the horizon so long as we stay engaged and we encourage our lawmakers to do the right thing.
James, thank you for digging into this research. So grateful that you are exposing the cartel as that they act to help Texans fight back. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.